Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Pearson, and I will be going through Chapter 1 with you. I will use the slides that come with the Pearson Education book, which is version 4. It's shown on your first slide here. Uh, this with um, the lectures and the readings that you do should give you a really good idea of how each module or each chapter works, kind of the core principles that we want you to take away from each chapter. So every chapter, you're going to get a set of materials. I do tend to talk with my hands, so as we're going through, if you see me moving about and you don't see my hands moving, it's probably because I'm moving them too low, too high. I did a set of slides where I was just the Wizard of Oz behind the screens, and a lot of people said, no, 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 don't do that because that just is weird, and we'd want to have someone that looks like they're talking to us. So here I am. So with that, let's hop into Chapter 1, and let's talk about Chapter 1. So your learning objectives as you go through Chapter 1, describe the current issues, trends, and problems with cybercrime and cyber terrorism. Understand the estimates on costs of cybercrime. Understand the intended audience, purpose, and scope. Discuss the developmental perspective. Describe the scheme for classifying computer crimes. And by the time we get done with this, you should have a pretty good idea of what we're talking about when we say cybercrime as opposed to computer crime. Is there really a difference? And we're going to talk about things such as that. We're also going to talk a little bit about cyber terrorism, but we're going to talk about that more as we progress down through the chapters. So cybercrimes inspire fear in consumers and lead to a lack of trust and security. The dangers of cybercrime and terrorists are real. And there's a rapid growth of computers and internet devices created over the years. All right, so I grew up without a computer, without cell phones. I walked to school in the snow uphill both ways. So I come from that older generation. But the fact is that computers are quickly moving into everything that we do, so that really there isn't very much left in our society that we do that doesn't involve some type of technology, and that can be a good thing, and that can be a really bad thing. So when you talk about artificial intelligence making decisions and becoming managers and taking over assembly lines, things such as that, people immediately think of Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator coming out and destroying everybody. I tend to fall in the line with other people that say that at some point computers are going to no longer need a biological entity, and they're just going to forget about us, and we'll become kind of the second citizen of the globe. That's my personal opinion. Those views expressed do not represent Utica. So it definitely is on ingrowth, and I don't think anybody that's in this class would think that computers are going away, all right, because they're not. They're just going to become more and more entrenched. Now, what I do see them becoming also is more biological. So I see the adoption of humans and computers into a single entity becoming more feasible. People right now are trying to create cyborgs. They actually go and have surgeries done so that they can have a hearing aid or a cell phone or a limb placed in place of a perfectly good organ. Not that they lost a leg, not that they were injured, something like that. They're choosing to replace a limb that is functional with a limb that's not functional. Or, excuse me, that is functional, it's just technology functional. So computers can be used to perform many traditional criminal acts. This is one thing that's really important. Computers didn't create crime. Computers just made it faster, better, easier to do crime. Distribution of child pornography. When I started doing this back in the early 90s, 94, we were teaching techniques of how to use the UPS driver, and then you would send a letter to someone, and they would buy child pornography, and the UPS guy would come and deliver the package that they were looking for. When they exchanged the money for the package, your task force would arrest the guy. And as I'm going through this, you'll hear me say guy a lot. Please don't take any offense to that. That's my vernacular. It's very hard to get over. And to be very honest with you, I never arrested a lady in child pornography. So guys is what I know from child pornography for sure. Financial crimes, faster, easier, better. Connect up computers, transfer some bits from one to another, and I can now rob you of possibly things that are in your bank account. Corporate espionage, exploitation, stalking, identity theft. These are all crimes that are aided by the computer. They're not computer crimes specifically, but they're done faster and easier with a computer. Stalking, I can use geo references, I can use geo coordinates, I can use your cell phone against you. Identity theft, I can create pictures, I can pretend to be you with identity theft. So those are all things that are possible in the world of computer crime. And again, they weren't created. There was identity theft prior to the computer, and there was stalking prior to the computer. It just the computer gave us a bunch of new tools to accomplish that crime. And you're going to see that as we go through. The book and this course, it's really intended as an introduction to the problems of computer crime, and you're going to see that as we go into our computer crime deliverable. Just the challenges that you're going to face extracting information from your suspect, me, or one of the actors that we have play one of the people that you're going to interview. And you're going to see the challenges that come from conducting an interview. It's not like TV. When you're the person sitting there, you're not Ken Stabler on Law and Order, and you come in and slam your hand down a few times, and then I start crying and give you everything you want. Or I come in and make a deal with you, and we have the best deal, and you take my deal. Very much TV based. Sometimes deals are made, but not always. There's a stigma to deals, so there's a lot of times we don't do that kind of stuff. So this book is an introduction to get you thinking how law enforcement looks at the cyber world. It's important for you as a cyber manager to understand what law enforcement is and isn't going to do if you have a crime at your corporation. You call them and say, hey, this is we'd like an investigation done, and they may or may not be able to respond to it. You also may call them and say, hey, I got a investigation, and they may say, or take that back, you may say, hey, I need to do an investigation. You tell your chain of command, and your chain of command says, absolutely not. We're not exposing that we were hacked. We are not exposing that we were victims. We're just going to take it. The financial loss will be a loss, and we're moving on. So there's also that. We'll talk about that more in detail as we go forward. And then text is focused on Microsoft-based systems. This is mostly because the lion's share of computers used in cybercrime are Windows-based, and then a majority of the forensic tools that are out there are based in a Microsoft-based system. If you have a Mac-based system and you're connecting to this course, you know that you've probably had challenges with different things here and there connecting up. So the world very much is based on Microsoft. Apple is a great product, but it's just not something that people build their systems for right now. Linux is not a system people build their platforms for right now. It's what the consumer tends to demand. All right, some terms. So cyber, to mean real or virtual attached to a computer network. So when we're talking about cybercrime, we're talking about a node that is connected to a network then is distributed beyond a local area network to a wide area network. That is really when we're talking about cybercrime. If we are talking about a local area network, a house or a small company, and crime is committed inside that company, more often you will not have law enforcement involved in it. Most companies like to keep their dirty laundry out of the press, and something you need to understand right away is anything that we do as law enforcement. So when I was at the sheriff's department, anything that we did, or when I was at with the federal side, anything that we did became public record. So if I took an interview, or if I did an investigation, I wrote up a report, that became public record that someone could search later on once the case was disposed of in court. The difference between cybercrime and cyber terrorism. So cybercrime is a criminal organization that uses the computer to commit some type of crime. Cyber terrorism is a radical organization, or a ideologically based organization that is not seeking monetary gain, but is more seeking an ideological benefit. In other words, if I can cause fear in a group of people, that's definite, or a definition of terrorism. A small group of people causing a fear within a large mass of people. That's terrorism. In the 80s, when I was investigating, when I was with the terrorism task force in Germany, we were investigating Baader Meinhof and the Red Faction Cell. And what they would do is blow up cars in parking lots. Well, it made people very nervous. You'd walk out and you might find a small piece of wire near your car, and people would think there was a bomb in their car. So it was, constantly getting bomb threats and bomb calls, all that kind of stuff. But, when you looked at the statistics, there were only 3 bombs ever placed in that 2-year period in the places that we thought they were going to be. So terrorism works by intimidating and putting fear, where cybercrime is it's more of a financial gain. I'm going to do something because I know I'm going to have a reward. So my reward is going to be money. It's going to be some type of fiduciary gain. And then we have malware, and malware can be used by the terrorists. It can be used by cyber criminals. We have viruses, worms, spyware, adware, destructive software, and then malware. Everyone knows this is short for malicious software. And when we get a malware virus or worm or Trojan, typically the computer that's being attacked is going to be a Windows-based system. If you're on your Mac, now there are Mac and Apple viruses. Don't think you're completely safe now because you have an Apple. There's a lot of people starting to write code for Apples, but IBM still is the #1 operating system to have viruses written for. So if you can have anything other than a traditional PC desktop, you increase your security 100 times. All right, so what are some of the complications? As we already talked about, cybercrime has increased in the last 20, 30 years. It's only going to get worse. The inclusion of computers are being included in everything. They're in our cars, they're in our houses, they're in this place. If I say the wrong word, my little box over here is gonna ask me what I want. So we're implementing technology to take over things that we used to do as humans. They can mow our lawns now. They act as our security systems. And depending on how you use your device that you have over here, and I'll call it Alex, not the other one, you may use it as some type of digital deity. In other words, you may go to it and ask it questions that you wouldn't even ask your priest or your pastor. And there's actually been an uptick in that over the last few years. Systematic data collection procedures, cybercrimes. There are procedures. they're just not followed. DOJ has done a great job. We have lots of rules and regulations for the collection of computer crimes. When I first started out, there was absolutely no collection procedures whatsoever. In fact, my very first computer crime investigation, I went to the crime scene, folded up the 8-inch floppy disk, put it in my back pocket, and went back to the office. Probably not something I could get away with today, but because nobody knew or cared about computer crime, in fact, they didn't even think that that was going to be involved in the computer or in this crime. They didn't think that this would be involved. Nobody cared about how we collected it. And then the offenses, they really vary across the board in the types and things that you can do with a computer. The more we add to computers, the more we use computers, the more we're going to see crime in computers. There's an old joke that Microsoft used to come out on a Tuesday and say, we just did a great new add-on, and the security world would say, great, what's broken now? And it was very true, because they would have an add-on, they wouldn't test it as much, they used the population as beta testers, which left a lot of holes. Zero-day viruses were very common. They're not as common, but there still are many zero-day viruses out there, or zero-day exploits. I don't know if I totally agree with the few experts explored potential to use computers to commit crimes in the beginning, because looking at the child pornography uptake, we went from UPS trucks delivering lots of media where we were arresting people, to zero trucks showing up with stuff, to everything being online in about a year and a half. It just exploded onto the internet. It became the way of being able to exploit and being able to get information across, because we didn't have the mechanisms at that time at all to investigate. It was very much in the advantage of the computer criminal, because we didn't have the laws, we didn't have the tools, and we didn't have procedures, and we do now. We have a lot of that stuff's in place. So I would say the exploration back in the day, there was absolutely a ton of people that saw the challenges, and I like to consider myself one of those people, as a kind of from the old guard of computer crime investigators. But there was some research. Now, it could have been a lot better, and the academics could have jumped in a little bit more, but they didn't. And it was kind of left to some of the early things. Like Eoghan Casey was big. Don Parker were all researchers in this early age and early stages. The One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Egg and the Takedown, they focus on the mechanics. In fact, if you ever want to read a good book, it's a tattered one that I have, but this is my copy of the Cuckoo's Egg. I think I bought this back in, it's got a library stamp in it, and maybe I don't need to show you that. Anyway, the Cuckoo's Egg is a great book. Takedown's a good book. There's a lot of really good books out there that talk about how the computer age came into place. But a lot of it focused on, especially like Mitnick books, they'll talk about how he did it. They don't talk much about him because we weren't focusing on the offender. We were focusing on the actual crime itself. It was easier to talk about the crime. That was more interesting than the person, because the person, and a lot of times in computer crime, was just a very boring person. They had great skill at doing something, but they weren't really good at social interaction. So the focus on most of these books, so they had a story to tell, came from how they did it, what they did in their actual computer crime. Two trends that have increased cyber victimization: the increased use of computers and the availability of technical information on viruses. I will tell you there's a third one, and this is from my own research, and it's something that uh, needs to be identified, and that's the delineation between the cyber, or excuse me, between the computer native and the computer immigrant. Uh, Computer native is someone who grows up with computers. My child is a computer native, has grown up with computers, has computer, and has a situational awareness of computers. So when he is attacked by someone, he looks at that and says, "Well, wait a minute. You know, this is probably a virus, or this is probably something bad," because I have awareness. His grandmother is not. She's an immigrant, so she is an immigrant, technology immigrant that's come into this world, and this technology immigrant is not situationally aware. So we've created a whole class of people that are not able to protect themselves because they aren't aware of how to protect themselves. Um, so the computer native and the computer immigrant, and again, the computer native draws the computer immigrant in, or the digital immigrant draws the digital native in through the process of kind of a threat. My daughter will tell my grandmother, she'll call and say, "Hey, how are the babies doing?" And my daughter will say, "They're great, Grandma. Get on Facebook and check in." My mom does not want to get on Facebook, has no desire to get on Facebook. She wants a letter in the mail that has Polaroids in it. Not going to happen. So my mom has to get on the computer, and someone helps her get on the computer, and they take her to where she needs to go, and then she gets to see pictures and makes her happy. But she has no understanding of what she's doing. She has no understanding of why she has to do that, and she's very available for any computer criminal to come along and pose a some type of phishing attack on her, or any other attack on her, because she is someone that is a victim waiting to be victimized. Um, the other thing about elderly people is they typically have money. You know, they're not the young kid that's just starting out that has no money, or has the big college debt. They're someone that's kind of towards the latter part of their lives, and they've probably banked some money, and they probably have some money that they can give to someone if they see a just need or cause. Um, all right, so who poses the greatest threat? Well, the greatest threat is caused by insiders. I mean, that's just, they're already behind your firewall, they're already inside your network. They're going to be able to do things that someone coming from the outside and hits your firewall won't be able to do. The outsiders is an increasing threat, but it's never going to be as devastating as an insider threat. Most networks, and you'll talk to administrators, and we've interviewed a lot of administrators over the years, and they will all tell you, yeah, I don't have anything monitoring the inside, but I can tell you everything about the firewall on the outside. And that's great if you're looking for the firewall on the outside. But if you're looking for an insider, or somebody that's done something that they shouldn't do, gained access somewhere they shouldn't have gained, then you need some type of logging mechanism on the inside. There just isn't that level of protection. So insiders are always going to be your greatest threat. They come with implied trust because they are on your network. And then the outsider, they're going to use an insider to open a hole for themselves. They're looking for someone to help them get in and onto that network. The cyber terrorism and cyber crime, and the reason I'm kind of pausing here is because it's a little bit difficult, because there's so many ways you can look at it where they're really the same. Cyber terrorism is really ideological, and that's how we look at it. That's how I look at it specifically. Is cyber terrorism is looking to cause fear for a reason, so to speak. It's nation state, it's political, it's, there may be some money gained, but it's going to be used for some type of furtherance of my ideological game that I'm playing. Where cybercrime is very financial. But again, if I do a cyber terrorism and I'm collecting money through a malware, I'm committing a cyber crime to support my cyber terrorism. So it can be very complicated sometimes. It may start out as a cyber crime and then turn into cyber terrorism. Is there an advantage to that? Well, in our laws in the United States, there absolutely is, because terrorism gives me different courts and different mechanisms, subpoena mechanisms and powers that I don't have under traditional cybercrime rules and regulations. National Infrastructure Protection Center can be made that cybercrime and cyber terrorism are on parallel tracks. Okay, so you look at Russia and the cyber terrorism. So you got the Internet Research Agency that's over in Russia, APT27, APT28, that are doing very specific computer crime related things. They are very much going out. And then at the same time, you turn that, when we went to the 2016 election, you turn that, and that those same groups were also employed to become troll farms and steal information from networks and do those kinds of things. So Russia has a national interest, and they also have a criminal interest, and those intertwine very much inside of that little space. So again, it can be very confusing. Stuxnet in Israel, Stuxnet or Olympic Games, that's where we put a virus that was our virus that we put onto a Iranian centrifuges, and we caused the spinning centrifuges to spin at different speeds, causing destruction on the centrifuges, and destroyed lots and lots of centrifuges that Iran had to stop them making nuclear material. Israel was the one that actually released the Stuxnet virus. Some say because it was impatient, we weren't moving fast enough. But however it got released, and it ended up attacking more than just Iran. It went out and got into the world, and it started attacking computers around the world. And it came back to the United States. The United States started defending against this thing called Stuxnet with the Department of Homeland Security. And at the same time, our other agencies were the ones writing the code. Neither one ever talked to each other. So you have one defending, one writing, which are on the same team, but have no idea they're on the same team. It's kind of like playing football and not really knowing which end the end zone's at, and kind of having to figure it out while you're on the field. And that was a huge problem for us. The costs derived from the surveys and corporations. You know what? I take these costs and I throw them into a big garbage can, because companies don't report the costs correctly. Most underreport. If you're a bank, I mean, look at a bank. If you're a bank, why would you tell the world that you are you just lost $20,000, or you just were robbed for $100,000, or half of your customers lost money? Why would I do that? I wouldn't. I'd want to keep that as absolutely quiet as possible, and that's what the cyber criminal is hoping, is that banks and folks like that are not going to want this publicity, so they're not going to be aggressive in prosecution. And they're right most of the time. A lot of companies underreport, especially hacking attacks, malware attacks, things such as that. And then a lot of companies, because they have more robust cyber departments, they take care of it on their own and they don't report it at all. There's been an effort to get people to report, but the federal government is not the enforcement arm of technology. It's actually the private corporations, and the corporations that own the networks are the ones that protect the networks. So, it says on the bottom there may be intentional or unintentional biases. It's a part of doing business. I'm not going to tell people, especially in the security world, financial world, you imagine if your local credit union called you and said, "Hey, sorry, we were robbed last night and you've lost $10,000." How long would you bank with them? You wouldn't, and you'd be on the local news, and then the bank would be out of business. So cybercrime costs are very much underreported. Um, FDLE did a study focused on the internet threats in the early 80s and 90s. There was a 1998 joint study by the FBI and the Computer Security Institute. Found that 3 years in a row, corporate outsiders had an increase of outside penetration. But they also realized that with that outside penetration in the 98, they also found that there was a lot of inside assistants, people, network administrators, people like that were on the payroll that would open up a port here or a port there that would allow it. There was also a lot of collusion between, oh, I said the word collusion. There's a lot of collusion between the manufacturers of hardware and software and computer criminals. So someone might be able to get a code into a piece of firmware that's put into a computer, or a nation state might put firmware onto a device like a network card, something like that has a a port that's not noticeable, that's open, that allows people to come into it. The 2012 Anderson conducted research to accurately measure the monetary costs of cybercrime, and there are no accurate costs, especially when you start talking about North Korea. You start talking about nation states that are doing cybercrime. North Korea, the conservative estimate in North Korea is $30 billion a year, and that's with a B, that they do in cybercrime and the proliferation of hacking people around the world. And then there's lots of indirect costs that come from that. The protections, the training, things like you're doing right now, going to school to learn how to protect against all that. These are all incidental costs or indirect costs that go into protecting the network that are not included in that research. So if I have a bank and I have a network, I have to have firewalls, and I have to have all these other things that are directly related to security. Then I have to hire people, and I have to send you to training, and I have to do, those are all my indirect costs to the protection of that network. So you have this huge number, and again, it will never be, I don't think it'll ever be calculated to any fine number. All right, so the classifications of computer crime. There's been a trend over the last, I would say, 10 years to really define the computer crimes into very specific containers. And then some people are throwing out the word hybrid warfare, and they're creating new terms. And the thing is, we don't need new terms. We just need to understand the terms that we already have, because I think we have enough terms. So when computer crime changed to cybercrime, monies became available because it was a new thing. You have cybercrime. It's not computer crime, it's cybercrime. And there really wasn't a big difference between the naming of the wording. It's just one's cyber and one's computer. They both use computers to do the work. But one of the other changes that they looked at when they started classifying computers is there a motivation of the perpetrator? Is there a way to understand why people do computer crime? And we're going to talk about it in chapter 3. But what's the motivator for? We understand the mechanics. We got that. And we spent a lot of time, as we talked about a couple slides ago, we spent a lot of time in the mechanics, but we didn't really talk about the motivation. And this allows us to now look at, in this new classification of stages, we're now looking at the motivations of the perpetrators. Things that these should be helpful to us in apprehension. If we understand why people do it, we can add protection, but we can also maybe provide some type of mechanism to stop people from doing cyber crimes or computer crimes, give them another choice, as we did in choice theory, of a path to take where they don't get themselves into trouble. All right, so Carter. I remember, I think the first time I taught Carter's classifications was in 1997, back at the CID Academy. And the classification of computers basically falls into four parts. Computers are target, instrument, incidental, and then crimes that are associated with the prevalence. So when you talk about the computer as a target, that's the thing I want. So your PC, your laptop, your network device, your node, printer, the thermometer in the fish tank, those are the things that I'm looking for. I'm going to attack a device. The computer is the target of my crime. 2016 Summer Olympic Games, they tried to do a denial of service attack. The 2016 Trump and Hillary presidential campaign, they stole emails from the DNC. They tried to provide information about the Trump organization. They tried to provide information about the Democratic organization. So there was lots of things where the targets of computers, people were trying to get into computers to get information. They wanted that golden kind of ticket. But in a way, and this is something to think about, that so take Trump and Hillary, for example. You have a Democrat and Republican. If I'm looking for that piece of gold and I'm a Democrat, I'm going to attack a Trump computer. If I'm a Hillary, I'm going to attack a Trump person, I'm going to attack a Hillary computer. So the Trump-Hillary was ideologically motivated, which then falls into the world of cyber terrorism. Even though there's a computer crime committed, it still falls into the world of cyber terrorism. So you can see how easily and quickly, and this is a very strategic look at that event, but you can see how quickly that's going to break out into many different forms, and you can't just classify it as one thing. Data alteration, network intrusion, computer vandalism, where I put my initials up in the code of a website. I don't actually change the website. I don't take the website down. I don't want to do that. But I'll put my initials somewhere in the code of the website, the HTML, and then I'll tell all my friends, hey, go check it out. I just hacked the NSA website, and I put my initials on there. That gives me profs in my group that people are then like, wow, did you see that old Steve over there was able to hack the NSA website? So sometimes it's better not to do something that is so noticeable that they replace the website. Sometimes people do it just so they can get their name out there and say, hey, look, I can do this. And if you go look at this specific spot, you'll see where my proof is that I just did this. Computer as an instrument. Basically, I use the computer to gain the criminal objective. Theft, fraud, threats and harassment, bullying. A lot of these things couldn't be done unless I had the computer as the instrument of committing the crime. The person on the other side has to have a computer. I have to have a computer. They have to be on Facebook. I have to be on Facebook or Twitter or I was going to say LinkedIn, but I don't think LinkedIn does a lot of that. But you have all these social media networks that are usable, but you have to have a device to access those social media networks. And that makes the computer an instrument to display that code, that information. Computer is incidental. So if I'm doing money laundering, the crime is not typically going to be on the network itself. Money laundering happens by me doing banking and moving monies through, which is not a crime, but it's the use or the ability of the computer to help me do that. Child pornography, changing images. I can have images off the network. I'm not doing cyber crime because I'm really not connecting node to node, but I'm making and facilitating pictures on my computer, which are then sent out. So the computer is incidental. I have to have the computer, and that computer becomes a part of my my evidence trail or my evidence timeline that I'm going to need to use to go after the person. And then crimes associated with the prevalence of computers, intellectual property theft. Again, this is because we have so many computers out there I have a greater victim pool. And we're going to talk about victim pools, and we're going to talk about less capable guardian theory and things like that in chapter 3. But if I have lots and lots of victims, and I don't have lots and lots of police, or I don't have lots and lots of security, it's basically becomes the pickings of the cyber criminals. So the prevalence of computers, just the mass amount, makes it a very attractive target for computer crime, or people to go out and do computer crime. Gordon Ford has 2 categories of schemes. Type 1 offenses are primarily technological in nature. They involve a single or discrete event from the point of view of the victim. It involves the use of malware and can be facilitated by the computer software vulnerabilities. This is, when you start looking at this type of offense, a single offense, now you're talking about the malware, where I seize your computer and you now pay me to unlock your computer. From the person's perspective, it seems like it's a single thing. It's just me knowing it's never happened to anybody else. From the criminal side of it, from the law enforcement side of it, we have to look at the totality of circumstance and say, okay, look, this is being used across a large swath of people, so this has become a big threat. People are very singular in their view of crime. It's just me, it happened to me, it is me. And they look at events in that frame, and we as law enforcement have to break out from that frame. Type 2 offenses don't involve the malware. They involve repeated contacts or events from a point of view of the victim, don't usually involve software. This is where I'm going to get your, what we call your PPI, personal information, protected personal information, and your information will include your social security number, social security or date of birth, mother's maiden name. I'm going to stalk your genealogy site and see what your family tree is, because that's going to give me a lot of information about who you are. If I see your grandmother still alive, I'm going to call your grandmother, ask her questions about you. If you're someone of legitimate interest that I'm stalking or harassing, I'm going to use everybody around you to gather information about you. There's a lot of people that will talk freely about you and never think twice about what they've said. So understand it's not going to be you so much, but it is going to be someone that's close to you that is going to give that information away. Anderson developed a more recent classification in 2012, and basically he says it's primary to derive estimates of costs, traditional crimes that are now cyber because they are conducted primarily online. But online is a strange term, because online means network, and we had networks before. Computers were connected to cords, were connected to switches, routers, servers. That all happened in the traditional world, and now we have a connected world where we have the same technology and topology, and now we're going to call it cyber. So sometimes I agree with it, sometimes I don't agree with it. It kind of depends on the day, I guess. But I don't see the difference between a computer crime, because if I'm in a standalone environment and I use it as a computer is incidental to a crime, it's still cyber, and it's still going to be classified as cyber. It's not going to be just a computer crime. Transitional crimes have changed the advent of the internet. And what are we talking about in transitional crimes? So transitional crimes, these are crimes that are moved from the traditional world into computer crime, stalking, money laundering, all those things that you can do that you've been doing for years and years and years, and now we do it online. And then new crimes that have originated since the advent of the internet. So prior to the internet, we didn't have cyberbullying. We just had bullying. Now it's transitioned, but now it's become something different. Now I can do things in the cyberbullying world that I could never do. I have new crimes. So I have a 30-year-old person that's posting as a child. That you couldn't do that in the traditional world, because you had to be around that person to bully them. So it's changed. The crime is now different. It seems a lot like it's the same, but it's not. It's fundamentally different. Now I have a different class of people that are attacking people online because they can only online. It didn't transition from, hey, I was doing this, I was going to the schoolyard as a 30-year-old and beating up kids, and now I'm going to do it online. I'm going to do the same thing. It went from the peer group around this person that everybody knew, could see, could feel, touch, whatever, has moved onto an ethereal device that no one sees, no one knows who that person actually is. So the crime is fundamentally different at its core. And that's what we talk about, new crimes that have originated. You can think about other crimes that have originated on that, spoofing, caller ID spoofing, things you couldn't do with traditional old POTS telephones. You have to have some type of packet structure to be able to manipulate that. So there's a lot of things you can do. And then crimes that facilitate other crimes through the misuse of computers. This would be me blasting a virus out onto a network. So the network gets a virus and then it spawns that virus out onto all the other computers on the network because it has the ability to do that. This is the facilitation where I'm not involved anymore. I've launched it, let the computers, destroy themselves, and at the same time causes issues with the humans. All right, so we've covered a lot of information, and I want you to make sure that you read your books, go through the stuff that we talked about. If you have questions, we do an online meeting. That's a great place to ask your questions about what we've covered. So with that, I will let you go, and I will see you in the next PowerPoint, or I will talk to you online. And goodbye.